So in our series on Czerny Bach that you seem to enjoy as much as I do making it, we arrive at number 11. And guys, again, I'm not giving an introduction. I said that the last time, but I did give an introduction, so I'm not going to do that. We compare 9 performances taken from the last 70 years, just to check what actually musicians come up with what kind of tempo they come up with when they don't actually have a metronome number that either is there somewhere, or they try to fit in with what actually is a developed taste. For instance, in a Beethoven sonata or a Mozart sonata, where we are just used to have very, very, very fast performances. When we apply the same logic to this Bach era, in this case the Inventions metronomized by the same Czerny that gave us these insanely fast metronome marks for later works, then we see a different reality. On average, we are much, much slower than single beat, and a lot of performers actually are around Czerny interpreted in whole beat. And of course, the entire point is when Czerny is considered here to be whole beat, then he must be whole beat in all his other metronomizations as well. And since he was so close to Beethoven, for instance, I mean, people isolate Beethoven all the time, and as if he lived on an island. There is nothing special in Beethoven's metronomization or notation. It was just regular stuff. Then this can be a precedent for you to reconsider also other fields or other times or other kinds of music where metronome marks seem to make sense if only they were just 10 or 15 or 20% slower. So that's the logic of this entire series. So now we are looking at, going to pull it up on screen, at number 11, the score at least. Here it is. It's not, this is number 10. Here is number 11 at the bottom. G minor, it's a kind of normal 4/4 bar. Czerny marks it with allegro and gives 120 to the quarter note, which is in that tradition of metronome marks, I wouldn't say on the slow side, but it's definitely not one of the fastest allegros. And you can see why. Even though it's a normal common time 4/4 time signature, let me give you the next page if I am able to hear this. You see some kinds of elements that kind of slow the normal tempo a little bit down. For instance, here syncopations with ornaments. Whenever you have syncopations and the piece starts with a syncopation, similar to this one, but in the left hand, and Czerny rightfully, I think rightfully, who am I to say that Czerny does something rightful? I mean, come on, this makes no sense. But I mean, I would do the same thing as Czerny does here, like giving an accent to this syncopation. And maybe in that style, you play it legato. There is a legato like here, both over these notes. But on a clavichord or harpsichord or definitely an organ, you give a little bit of an articulation here to emphasize that syncopation. So articulation is also something that enhances the importance of some notes. You know, when you make an articulation here, obviously that syncopation is going to get a larger value or more value. It's going to have more attention, so to say. But when you do all of that, then of course it has an implication on the tempo. And so again, here we had in the previous segment in this series a discussion or I was asking the question, what is presto? Presto in regard to what? In relationship to what? And here's the same thing, allegro in relationship to what? What sense does it make, if you think about it, that you mark allegro for a certain piece, which indicates like I want you to play a little bit faster than the normal tempo, than what the normal tempo would be when we didn't mark it as allegro. That's the normal tempo. While on the other hand, you have all these indicators that go for a slower tempo, like syncopations, and Czerny marks also here, 2 staccato notes. The second one here on top Well, you can say like that's just tap-pam. Okay, but when you mark the last note with the staccato, it gets a little bit of an accent. There is no escape there. Also here, like this, it's kind of a microsystem, like legato. The last note you go over the beat, which you would not do on a clavichord or in the 18th century. I would say that this is kind of 19th century practice. Although, I mean, it's a piano, where he writes this for. It's not so that you may mark that you disconnect the E flat from with the D with a huge articulation on the clavichord. The clavichord, by the way, allows you to play. And I'm not making, this is not a clavichord video, but I'm recording the well-tempered keyboard right now, so it's like all over me, like in my mind. But on the clavichord, you have the possibility to go from D to E flat with a legato that doesn't sound like a legato just by the way you actually give this D and the E flat. It's very complex, but the amount of expressiveness or expressive tools you have on the clavichord is just, it's unbelievable once you kind of master this touch, which comes by the ear. But I mean, I'm not digressing on that. That would be interesting though to do once, and I promise you that I will go into that, all of that. This year once I'm done with the book, and then okay, enough digressing. So here you have this element of you go slower in notation, you acknowledge that here in Czerny's case, and yet you give allegro while the tempo you mark is 120 quarter note. By the way, 120 quarter note is the tempo ordinario historically. I mean, a little bit slower, a little bit faster sometimes, but that's the average. Definitely, that's the tempo that is given the most in sources that give actually a concrete middle tempo. Mersenne starts with that. Of course, if you interpret Mersenne in the way Lorenz Gadiens interprets it, otherwise it's double of that. And that's the same thing with the metronome. So Czerny gives 120 quarter note for a piece that is clearly very close to tempo ordinario. He wants to have it a little bit faster, but then he refrains from that tempo increase with his metronome mark. So there, you see how well all of this works together. You cannot say, oh, it's marked allegro, so you have to play much faster. No. There is a notation. There is something where you come from. And thanks to the metronome mark, we can actually put all of that together in the context. When we wouldn't have the metronome mark, what would allegro mean? I mean, we will have, some people sometimes hear them say, like, we don't need the metronome marks, we have the Italian tempo. I mean, that's the reason. It's absolutely the reverse. The reason that people actually were happy with the metronome in that time is that the Italian tempo words were just too relative. They were outplayed, they were outdated maybe even in a more and more complex notation system. So here you have there the example. And when 120 quarter note is really literally in single beat, and that's one of the major points you have to understand. It's not the most sexy argument, but you have to acknowledge then, making the point here for whole beat in the Czerny Bach videos, and I mean, it's not a point, it's not the place to do that, but I'm doing it anyways because here we have such a great example. When you see those metronome marks as single beat and single beat only, then you have to assume that there was a moment in time when the metronome was introduced that suddenly that tempo ordinario system became exactly twice as fast. From quarter note 60 in a single beat system reading to quarter note 120. While it doesn't make sense in these pieces. So that's something you need to reflect upon very carefully. When I make the case for whole beat from notation, I will guarantee you nobody would watch those videos and nobody would read the chapters that we write in the book about that. But it's one of the most important connections. The metronome system in single beat doesn't match this tempo ordinario system that was still there in Czerny's time. We have sources there, and I'm not going to digress here. Gottlob Turk, end of the 18th century, early 19th century, made the case for that, referring to the clock. I mean, this is, again, I'm not digressing there, but you have sources in the 19th century that say, okay, the middle tempo is just a second. Quarter note equals one duration of 1 second. And there you have metronome marks, Czerny indicating this with 120 instead of 60 for the quarter note, while he acknowledges the fact that these pieces actually were played a little slower in Bach's time, and they were for relative beginners. So there is a friction that you have to keep in mind. Okay, with having said all of that, let's see what the 9 performers actually make of this piece. So if I take you to the overview, which you will be very interested in right now, hearing the last performances, Lisitsa is faster than Gould this time. So here you have it. She reaches single beat, like even go a little bit beyond that. She's 124 quarter note, where Czerny gives 120. So all the others, Leonhardt is the slowest, not me this time. Nikolayeva 58, so that's 43%, 48%. So they're both slower than whole beat, Czerny whole beat. I'm actually very close. Let's say that's a whole beat performance. 64 instead of 120. You have obviously some margins. I could have played it in 60 here. That wouldn't make a big difference. So let's say that I'm in whole beat. And then Koopman goes a little bit beyond that. And it's interesting, go back to the overview if you're interested in hearing this. But here, I don't know if you noticed that, here it changes from Koopman to Schiff. Schiff, the way Schiff plays this piece, it's a complete different world. It starts to be a little bit of an open prelude, not taking into account all the elements that we discussed, like the tonality, the key in which it's played, G minor, and then the syncopations and everything like that. He's actually playing a little bit over that, but you hear that so well. So tempo changes everything. This is again an excellent example to just go and check for yourself. Listen what happens. Listen what happens from 43% to 53%, and then from 57% to 71%. Meyer is there. Gieseking is there. I mean, sometimes Gieseking is a little bit slower at the beginning, but he's all over the place with these inventions. It's hard to actually give an actual tempo. So it's more or less an average. Gould is 93%, and you have the impression when you come from the slower performances, well, that's like a shock already, and then Lisitsa goes over that. 68% on average. By the way, as with last episode, I realized I didn't give you the comparison single beat, whole beat, single beat, but it wasn't necessary actually, because I was a little bit slower than whole beat in the last episode, but Gould was like spot on, and Gould's performances again, I mean, it's impossible you get a copyright claim. It's not a problem, a copyright claim in YouTube's land, but in the case of Glenn Gould's recording, they're protected so much that you never know what the copyright owner is going to do. So I have to, as many other YouTubers, I would say, be very careful with sharing and Gould. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work. But it was not necessary because his performance was in single beat. And here it's not necessary either. You can go to my performance like 53% and then Lisitsa. But I'm going to give you the overview of whole beat, single beat here, because it's important also for you to just have those next to each other. These subtle differences, they are important, but when you have one, two, and you can never go back. It's like when you go back from the fastest to the slowest, people have that, everybody has that feeling, like it's like driving on the highway. You go like from Germany, you come with your when we come from Germany, for some, I mean, Sophia's always like, you cannot drive too fast. I mean, you can drive as fast as you can there. I'm not taking any risk. But if you then abandon or you leave the highway and you come in a village, you come from 160 kilometers an hour and you go to 50. I mean, it's like standing still. Quantz actually writes about that. He said when musicians play too fast, going back is difficult because it's like having tasted too spicy food. Your tongue needs to be accustomed again to slower tempi. That's so true. And I read that comparison. That's actually what it is. We have some 19th century sources, guys, also, but that's for later. That actually says it's actually that when the people play too fast, like 1830. I was even the Kapellmeister, I think, from the Viennese Cathedral. He said like church music is played way too fast, and it's hard to go back. But you have to at least give the performance one chance, and then the second time you will be accustomed to the slower tempo again. So, anyways, I give you the overview: single beat, whole beat, single beat. It's coming right now. So I don't know if you've noticed that, but we talked about like when you play way too fast, you will have to do something at the end, and see what Lisitsa has to do. Like this, the brakes, she has to pull up the brakes like so hard that in the last two bars actually she plays in whole beat. It's not indicated in the score like ritardando, ritardando. We have to do that, otherwise, how are you going to stop? Like, it's not possible. You have to. Your distance to end the piece becomes much bigger, and so also you have noticed that she slows down a little bit in the middle of the performance. She's actually correcting her tempo, I think. There, it's not much, but it's noticeable. And guys, it's 120. Yeah. Again, I'm comparing this often with the Hammerklavier's Fugue. This 144. So we are talking about not a little bit. From 120 to 144 might seem on paper like, yeah, it's all doable. Imagine that to play this piece, it's also allegro, the Hammerklavier's Fugue, to play this like at 144. It would be wild. And then still like imagine or assume that Czerny, when he had students, and he had a lot, he was teaching for 40 years, 8 hours a day. So can you imagine how many students this guy had? You come there, And there's one of the first Bach pieces you have to play. And since he says, and this so many times, I mean, Czerny is unbelievable metronome source. Like, it's tempo is the most important decision you have to make. The slightest deviation of time, he writes in his piano photo school, just entirely destroys the entire piece. So you come there and he marks these pieces with this, and then you have to then assume that, okay, yeah, but for those beginners, what the tempi were not for those beginners at the beginning. I mean, where do you end? There's someone said to me recently, like, the concept with the least assumptions actually wins in the non-scientific field, and that's of course what the number of assumptions you have to then incorporate into these metronome marks is like, where does it end? And in whole beat you just sit down and you play, and I can guarantee you, play it in 60 quarter note. It's not that this music becomes super easy. And again, the independence of the hands, and again, and so on and so on and so on. I could talk forever on these inventions. They are just amazing. And then you go to the sinfonias, which actually is the same level of difficulty with a new voice inserted in the middle. Every 3-voice piece of Bach or fugue is like incredibly complex. The well-tempered keyboard, I sometimes start playing and I forget then if it's a 3 or 4-voiced fugue, and I just have to, while I'm playing, actually looking, because it makes an impact. 4-voiced fugues are of course complex in their nature of playing, and the structure make it clear, but the 3-voice pieces are in Bach's. He's dividing the middle voice over the 2 hands in a way it jumps. It's unbelievable. And the inventions, the sinfonias, actually built, of course, on the inventions. Okay, but that's for another time. Thank you for watching. Hope you find this series interesting. We're going to number 12 next time, and then 13, 14, 15, and then I will make an overview, and then later we will see what to do with the sinfonias, because these comparisons are really important, and I know you enjoy them a lot. So again, thanks for watching, subscribing, check out our Patreon page, and if you do all of that, we see each other very soon again. Bye.